After you've been providing cloud cloud for security for cloud for a number of years, and for major or the largest organizations in the region, how was this challenging to start up with, and how you compare this with today's cloud security or security for cloud adaptation and programs? And if you can share with us advices and guidance for the audience here from your experience.
Okay. I mean, it was very interesting in the beginning when we first started coming to this region. People would come to us, and I'd say in the beginning, it's still in pockets today. We'd come to us and they go, "We don't want cloud." And we'd say, "Okay, what is cloud?" So it was really challenging, and some people would say, "Look, we want..." I even had it last week with a particular smart government, not here, and they said, "We want to do our website, but we don't want to do it in the cloud." I said, "Okay, really? Let me know how you're going to achieve your website not being in the cloud." And they went, no, we don't want to do the security in the cloud. But so it was a real funny concept in this region. It was about control, loss of control, and I think people still feel that today. That they feel, if I go in the cloud, I lose the control because I can't see it or touch it. I would argue, well, when was the last time you plugged into one of your devices in your data center? You actually sat in another room, often in another building, and you accessed it via a web browser. It just happened to be on your private network rather than on a public network. But it was still on the cloud anyway, of sorts. So there was a big period of education. And there was education, knowledge transfer that we went through, and really shifting people's mindsets to understand the advantages of that. And again, as I said earlier, how do you build out your policies to get that competitive advantage when you look around the world, what people are doing? People are getting really, really scientific about their processes, and they're looking at things like Six Sigma and how do you get that competitive advantage. And it can be down to actually cutting processes down by a minute on each process. And the things like technology is enabling these. So if we look at the technology enablers that exist today, it's very, very difficult to do this internally. If everybody's probably heard of the Internet of Things. It's not the Internet of internal things, it's the Internet of Things. So cloud is inevitable and it's coming to everybody. And as we get to more and more big data that we need to come in, again, from the Internet of Things, from different sensors, from different intelligence, it's all coming from the cloud. So again, coming back to the education we found, and it was also confusing in terms of there's lots and lots of stories out there, and some people don't actually have a tangible cloud, and some people do. So again, coming back to your questioning, make sure you question everybody else. So I found it really interesting over the last, say, 7 years, where we saw people saying no cloud, to people not actually mentioning cloud anymore when we was talking about certain security solutions, and people realizing actually cloud delivery is the only way for certain types of services, such as, for instance, DDoS services. To give you an example, I came from a company called Prolexic that was purchased by Akamai. They were the world's first ever DDoS mitigation as a service provider, and we delivered this in the cloud as a service provider. And everybody said, no, I want an appliance, I want an appliance, I want an appliance. And when we explained that the attacks were too big to handle locally, even on your local network, sometimes in your local country, they all went, okay, maybe that makes a point. So we started working with all the banks, etc. And now today, everybody's talking about a hybrid approach to DDoS, and that seems okay. So you have some on-premise, so you have this illusion of control, but actually the real attacks are fought in the cloud. So with education, it's been really good. The adaptation I see now is very encouraging. For what I've seen in the last, few weeks and few months, has led me to think, well, actually, we're turning a corner regionally, and people are starting not to look at the marketing words and the concepts and actually look at the drivers. So I'm very encouraged.
If I may,
please.
If I may comment on this. Actually, I really appreciate Aftab's points about how regulators needs to be aware of those kind of security enhancements to the cloud computing. To me, a cloud, if it used correctly and if it is enabled correctly in a secure way, it could enable a lot of, it will bring a lot of good advantages to the businesses, whether they are financial institutions or even government sector. Now, for many reasons, whether it's for availability of services, for BCP, for disaster recovery, for many reasons, even from a cost perspective as well. Now, the point that I want to try to make here is the vendors and the security professionals for cloud service providers or service providers to cloud services, they actually have the responsibility to make regulators and decision makers for each country aware of those kind of security controls and enhancements. One of the discussion points that I'm not sure if you all are aware that any financial institution here in the region, if they want to enable services to their customers using cloud computing, they have to get a permission and approval from the central bank of each country of those that they're regulated from. So let's say for us as a financial institution here in Qatar, in order for us to use a cloud computing or cloud services, we have to go to central bank and obtain approval. And one of the basically requirements for us to obtain that approval is to highlight what are the security controls and how things will be secure and safe in order to get that approval. Now, but the point that I'm trying to make, that after I guess clarify it now in a minute, is you guys have the responsibility and the obligation to go and help us.
I agree fully.
Okay,
I agree fully.
To really make those regulators aware, because they are not cloud providers, they are regulators. They need to know what do you have in your premises and in your services that you provide to the financial institutions and other than financial institutions that will make them comfortable to approve such requests.
Yeah, no, I agree, in fact, and it's events like this that we get that opportunity. And Qatar Central Bank was sat right there. They've gone. We'll speak to them later. We did the same in Saudi Arabia. You know, in Saudi Arabia, we started working with one of the largest banks there first of all, and then we started working with SAMA. And we went to SAMA and he explained, and we told them the controls and the granularity, and in the fact that they would be more secure rather than less secure. And in fact, they actually purchased the service. Not only did they recommend it to all the banks, they purchased the service. So that they became my second customer in Saudi Arabia some years ago. You know, so yes, and we've done the same in France, UK, the US, etc., etc. To be honest, it's easier in France and Europe and the US. Because they were already attuned to those types of services. And I wouldn't say we're behind, but culturally there's a little bit more restrictions regionally to actually have that trust. And maybe it's because we haven't actually spent the time, we spent more time in the US and Europe doing it, and we haven't spent enough time regionally. But you know, we're doing that now, so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, and that was really important and interesting discussion. And I think we can open the floor for questions if anyone wants to get more clarification. Start.
Two comments, not specific questions, but maybe two comments. I need your feedback on them. Okay. So on big data, people when start gathering data, just because they can, because the cost of storage is becoming very cheap. And sometimes you choose to retain data, although you don't have any benefit from it now, okay, but you might have use for it in the future. But the retention of such huge amounts of data does introduce a responsibility upon you. So, should we, because now we know the scale of breaches is becoming now in millions and tens of millions of records, Target, etc., okay? So now, because breaches are becoming more costly, so the responsibility with retaining such amounts of data is bigger. So are we rising up to this responsibility? This is a big question. Another question. I just want to say I know the other comment is about cloud. You know, I am really, I'm surprised how many decision makers are falling to the psychological weakness of humans, which is a basic psychological weakness, is that we tend to over-exaggerate risks when when things are outside of our control. The classic example is we exaggerate risk of flying versus driving, while we are maybe hundreds of thousands more likely to die in a car accident than in a plane. But we dread flying. Why? Because we have no control. But actually, the risk from flying is hundreds, maybe millions of times less than driving a car. I'm telling you, you are more likely to die in a car accident than in flying, but you are more comfortable driving. So the same thing is with cloud. Actually, having control might be more risky for you. So I really implore decision makers to consider cloud services and manage their contracts with their cloud providers and make sure that those cloud providers are contractually obliged to deliver your requirements, your security requirements, and your privacy requirements, and your legal requirements. So there are guides. ICT Qatar, they have a cloud security guideline you can use. Cloud Security Alliance, they have CSA. They have a very big, long questionnaire. And from our side as as a company, we actually did use those questionnaires to talk to some of the cloud providers we were considering at some point. So these are my comments.
Thank you.
Okay.
So,
I will. Thank you, Yasser. I mean, those are actually good questions. I will start with the first question. Now, as an information security professional, one of your obligations and your liabilities as an effective information security is actually to destroy data that you don't need. Data destruction is part of your responsibilities. I remember, so yes, making data available, archiving it, having it when it's needed, that's one of your responsibilities. But when it's not needed, you have to destruct it in a very insecure way. That's one of your responsibilities. To your point, I remember in the U.S., one of the clients, one of the Fortune 100 companies, one of the CIOs was saying, I have a big storage, I will archive everything and I will save everything backup. And one of the comments that was made at that time is, listen, first of all, it's costly, you don't need it. From a security perspective, you need to spend money to secure it. So if regulators and if the company no longer requires this information, you have to destruct and destroy this information. Sorry.
There is no incentive for you to secure it.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. So being I'm talking from an information security perspective here. Destroy it. Destruct the data if no longer required. And again, if no longer regulators mandate this information and data to be available in a secure way, you have to destroy it. That's my perspective. Now, to answer your question very quickly, if I may allow to. The other question was about, so if you don't mind reminding me.
the cloud and regulations.
Cloud,
The cloud and
perceived
the
risk,
risk that's
perceived risk around.
Oh,
The
okay.
big data.
I always tell my colleagues, I'm part of risk management. To me, information security is a risk function. And I always say, we don't live in a very risky environment. To me, what is the risk of driving your car to work? It's actually not the flat tire or the engine failure or the battery dies. It's actually not to be at work. That's it. So the risk is not to be at work. I mean, for me, that's the risk of driving your car to work. Now, what are the threats? Flat tire, battery dies, etc., etc. So really the controls that you need to do is to predict what could go wrong from a threat perspective, not from a risk. We do accept risks to some extent. So to your situation, Yasser, absolutely, we have to take some risks, otherwise we can't do business. This is from my point of view.
Thank you. And any other questions?
Well, thank you. So I'm Marc Dacier, I work for QCRI doing research in security. So yesterday there was this thought that security should really be a discussion taking place at the level of the board. And I think today's panel are good examples where sometimes it's not yet taking place. For instance, BYOD, people refer to at, bring your own device, but my feeling is that sometimes employees sees that more as buy your own device. It's a way to actually cut costs.
Doesn't matter.
And you have all said it's a nightmare from a security point of view. So clearly this is not a decision which has been made with security in mind. And regarding the cloud, so lots has been said already, and people say, yeah, if you move to the cloud, then control, blah blah blah. On the other hand, this is a perfect place to see tons of things and to do a better job from a security point of view. And most companies do a good job. But when you look at the sales pitch, when people actually have to choose, and I put aside the critical things like banks and so on, but when people look at, okay, which cloud provider am I going to choose, security is really an element which is set forward by the vendors. They say, bandwidth, quality of service, reliability, availability. Security, it's more like yeah, they have security, tick in the box. And you rarely communicate about all the things you do. So again, it seems to me that we are just leaving security to the security department or the subgroup somewhere there. Any comment on those things?
I kind of agree with you. It is. There are still these divisions between security and the rest of the business. But it does depend. I mean, that is organization to organization. Some of the panelists I've seen up here in the last 2 days, you can see they're really influencing and they're looking at the business drivers in there. Akamai as a cloud company, we have a dedicated security